In the last episode, we saw two brothers ruling the Roman Empire, Caracalla and Geta, the sons of the previous emperor Septimius Severus. And although their father wanted them to rule the empire together as brothers and friends, the two boys hated each other. And soon that hatred turned to violence. At a family dinner in 211 AD, Caracalla murdered his own brother, and he died, bleeding out in the arms of his mother. But this was just the first of many murders that Caracalla would instigate. Caracalla had big plans for the empire he inherited from his father, from economic reforms to reforms in the citizenship to a major war with Parthia. And so on this episode and the next, we will talk about the sweeping changes to the Roman Empire that occurred under the Emperor Caracalla. Episode 66, Caracalla transforms the Roman Empire. On the evening of the 26th of December 211, Caracalla's brother Geta lay dying, bleeding to death in the arms of his mother. And Caracalla had found his way to the camp of the Praetorian Guards, claiming to them that his brother Geta had tried to kill him, and in self-defense, Caracalla had killed his brother. Now, who knows whether the Praetorian Guards actually believed Caracalla, but the sources tell us that this didn't really matter, because Caracalla offered the Praetorians on the spot a rise in pay. And where did he get this money? Well, thousands of allies of his brother Geta, members of the Senate, rich, wealthy landowners throughout the Roman Empire, these men were murdered. They were declared enemies of the state, their property was confiscated, and the money went to the military. Cassius Dio, the Roman senator who began his career under the Emperor Commodus and had living memory of the great emperor Marcus Aurelius, was still alive under Caracalla, and he wrote this about the emperor. He was prodigal towards the soldiers, but he took pains to strip, despoil, and grind down all the rest of mankind from every side, sometimes without payment, sometimes at additional cost to ourselves, senators, all of which he either bestowed upon the soldiers or sold at retail. And there were gifts which he kept demanding from the wealthy, from private persons, and from whole communities. That's Cassius Dio's Roman history. Why was Caracalla so friendly with Roman soldiers? And why did he care so little about Roman Senate and the other members of the traditional aristocracy that some previous emperors had seen as valuable advisors, crucial partners in running a massive empire that stretched from Great Britain all the way to the deserts of the Near East? Well, if you remember, Caracalla's father, Septimius Severus, had came to power in the midst of a civil war. And he told his sons, enrich the soldiers and scorn all other men. Caracalla understood the realities of the Roman Empire as they really existed. And the soldiers' loyalty was fickle. They were not loyal to the state or an institution. Rather, their loyalty could be bought. And it was as simple as finding money to keep the soldiers happy. And that was how emperors stayed in power and prevented their rivals from taking over. Caracalla knew this. So in addition to paying the soldiers out of the proceeds of murders and property confiscations, he even adopted the look of a soldier. And this is something that we see of military autocrats at just about any time in history. Caracalla trimmed the philosopher's beard that many emperors had worn ever since the days of Hadrian. He took on the close, cropped look of a soldier, also wearing military gear on a regular basis. He imposed a variety of new taxes, including an inheritance tax, added extra import dues to tax trade. As a person who studies Roman coinage, I find it especially interesting that Caracalla decided to reform the Roman monetary system. And as is often the case, whenever a government reforms their monetary system, they are not doing it to inject value into the economy, but rather to skim wealth from the population, usually through some kind of reduction in the quality of money or an increase in the supply of money. And Caracalla does both of those things. Ever since the Second Punic War, way back in the mid-Roman Republic, we're talking the late 3rd century BC, so a good 400 years before the reign of Caracalla, the Romans had used a single coin denomination as the main basis of their monetary system. This is the Roman silver denarius. And as I've alluded to on a few episodes, there had been some substantial debasements of the Roman denarius. One under Nero after the Great Fire, where the silver content of the denarius was reduced from about 92.5% fine to around 80%. There had also been slow debasements that had occurred near the end of Marcus Aurelius's reign and also Commodus's reign. The denarius dropped to about 70 to 75% fine. And then, under Caracalla's father, Septimius Severus, during his civil wars, denarius purity reached about 50% silver. Now, if you study silver coins long enough, you begin to learn that there is a point at which the silver content can become so low that the coin no longer has a kind of silver shine. It takes on a pinkish hue or a brownish hue. And so you can't just keep extracting silver out of a coin without somebody eventually noticing. Now, the denarius had not reached that point yet, but from the writings of Cassius Dio, who says outright that Caracalla was debasing the coinage, it was likely that everybody realized at this point that silver had been taken out of the denarius. And so what Caracalla does is, instead of remove more silver from his coins, he just decided to mint a brand new coin. We don't know the name of this coin. Historians just call it the Antoninianus, after one of the names of Caracalla. It was, at least in appearance, a silver coin. It was twice as large as a denarius as well, in terms of its overall size. So it looks to all Romans that Caracalla is introducing a more valuable coin into the monetary system, and its official value was 2 denarii. In reality, however, this large coin, with its higher nominal value, had even less silver than the previous silver coins. And it in fact represented a major debasement, a major loss of value to the Roman economy. So in addition to outright stealing people's money and their land and their resources, Caracalla silently siphoned away real wealth from the Roman population by debasing their coinage. And this monetary experiment would be such a disaster that future emperors ceased minting this new coin and went back to the old denarius. Caracalla's changes to the monetary system were big, but even bigger was his change to Roman citizenship. If we think about the longer history of Rome, the city began as a small city-state in Italy. And as Rome continued to conquer more and more territory, first in Italy, and then around the western and then the eastern Mediterranean, citizenship was gradually extended at the same time, with elites in Italian cities being given citizenship, eventually all Italians receiving citizenship, and over time, communities in other parts of the Roman Empire gradually received citizenship as well. But even by the time of Caracalla, there remained strict divisions in many parts of the Roman Empire between those who were full, legal Roman citizens and what we might call free, non-Roman inhabitants of territories that the Romans administered. These people were called peregrini. They had basic rights, but not full access to Roman law. These free inhabitants, for example, could be tortured or executed at the command of their governor. They could not appeal to any higher authority. They were subject to certain taxes that Roman citizens did not have to pay, a poll tax, a tax on their land. They were not allowed to serve in the Roman military, although they could be drafted as what are called auxilia, a kind of second-class soldier that was paid less than a Roman soldier and often received fewer benefits. Perhaps most importantly for these free non-citizen inhabitants, they could not legally marry a Roman citizen. If they did have a kind of common law marriage with a Roman citizen, their children were deemed illegitimate. They could not inherit property. Having Roman citizenship and its access to Roman law was crucial not just for an individual, but it was vital to building a legacy, to preserving wealth and land and allowing it to grow over generations in one family. Without Roman citizenship, it was much more difficult to do that. And from a bureaucratic perspective, it could be challenging for Roman officials to figure out how exactly to deal with different inhabitants in different provinces, because there were still many local laws and local citizenships. And again, these differed from location to location. And so the Roman Empire was a kind of patchwork of law and courts and inheritance and taxes and voting and just a variety of different systems, some of them in conflict. Caracalla, being a military man and kind of a brute, just wanted the whole thing to be the same. It sounds like he got tired of his advisors and government officials explaining to him the different nuances of law and custom across his empire. He just wanted everybody to be the same. And so in 212 AD, he did something that had never been done before and something that would fundamentally change the meaning of Roman citizenship in the Roman Empire. We have a papyrus that survives from Egypt, which, at least in fragmentary form, is an edict coming from Caracalla himself. And I want you to hear a few things. First, the emperor's name. He claims the legacy of previous emperors, and these are people who actually are not related to him in any way, and the descendants of whom, by the way, he and his family members had killed. I also want you to hear a reference to the murder of his brother, and I want you to hear the extent to which the Emperor Caracalla uses religious language to talk about what he's going to do. Here is the decree. The Emperor Caesar Marcus Aurelius Severus Antoninus Pius decrees, it is altogether necessary to attribute the causes and reasons of recent events to the divine. I personally would rightly thank the immortal gods, since although such a conspiracy has occurred, they have watched over me and protected me. I think that I am able to do something fitting to the God's majesty if I manage to bring all those in the empire who constitute my people to the temples of gods as Romans. I therefore give everyone in the Roman world the Roman citizenship. Preserving customary law without additional privileges, all are due to pay taxes that have been imposed upon the Romans from the beginning of their 21st year of age, as it is the law, according to the edicts and rescripts issued by us and our ancestors. There's a lot going on in this edict. First of all, as I asked you to notice, we don't actually see Caracalla's name. That's a nickname that we use for him because he just stole the names of previous emperors and added them to his. Marcus Aurelius, Antoninus Pius, for example. We also note that he addresses directly the murder of his brother, which he claims was a conspiracy against him, but which contemporary sources claim was really instigated by Caracalla, that Caracalla murdered his brother, not the other way around. Finally, note the religious language here. As we've seen in previous episodes, the Roman Empire is starting to fall apart. Economically, socially, politically, there has been civil war, there has been coin debasement, there has been unrest and criminality in numerous parts of the Roman Empire. And for the Romans, these causes must be religious. And so Caracalla decides that an act of worship to the Roman gods that could potentially arrest the calamities would be to make everyone Roman citizens and have them go and worship Roman gods in Roman temples. I do think Caracalla actually believed that. I don't think this is purely cynical. I just did 5 episodes on the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire, and this was a concern to the Romans. That as Christianity in particular was growing in popularity, that the worship of the gods was being neglected, and that this was the cause of various calamities. Caracalla was not authorizing a persecution of Christians, rather he was commanding all inhabitants of the Roman Empire to worship Roman gods as Roman citizens. Of course, there was also a side benefit. I don't know if you caught it in the final part of the inscription, but it is that Roman citizens do have certain taxes they are obligated to pay, and Caracalla openly says that now all these people have to pay these taxes. Now, I will say this. I'm not sure that there is a net financial benefit in terms of taxes in making all of these free non-citizens suddenly into citizens. Yes, they have to pay inheritance taxes that they did not have to pay, and maybe they still had to pay the customary taxes that they had to pay in their provinces. If that's the case, it's a net gain in tax revenue. But if not, it's not really a gain. It's not really a financial benefit to Caracalla. What I think makes more sense is just a simpler answer. It's easier to recruit people to the Roman armies if they're all citizens. It's easier to administer the Roman Empire if all people are under the same form of law. Now, does this mean that all of these previously non-Roman citizens suddenly receive a higher standard of justice? Well, I'm sorry to say the answer is no. Already by the time of Caracalla, citizens had gradually been divided into two groups. One group, the humiliores, who were subject to a lower standard of justice and more severe forms of punishment, were the peasants, the former slaves, the tenant farmers, the artisans, and yes, non-citizen foreigners. So making those non-citizens into citizens still kept them in this legal category. I'm not sure that anything really changed for them vis-a-vis the justice system. It just made it impossible for these people, perhaps, to appeal to local codes of justice, which could have helped them against Roman abuses, at least in theory. The wealthy citizens, however, the equestrians, local elites, and senators, were in a category called the honestiores, the elevated men, the good men. These men, which probably make up less than 1% of the overall Roman population, kept the ancestral rights of Roman citizens. They were protected from torture. They could appeal to Roman magistrates. Their citizenship shielded them from certain abuses. Whereas the humiliores, although still Roman citizens, could be treated by Roman officials little better than slaves. I guess some animals are more equal than others. I'm not sure how effective this sweeping decree was, if it really was meant to solve a variety of judicial and economic and military problems. The reason that at least some non-citizens served in the Roman military was because they would get citizenship at the end. Now they're just getting citizenship. So why serve in the military at this point if you've already got the reward? It would have been a tremendous administrative burden to implement Roman law in whole provinces where a different kind of law had been enforced for centuries in some cases. Suddenly, a bunch of locals have to figure out Roman law and convert old statutes into new statutes. Now, what it does do from a strictly legal perspective is it allows the Roman emperor to issue edicts much more easily because everybody in the Roman world is legally his subject, and anything he says immediately applies to everyone. Caracalla's decision to extend citizenship to all Romans represented a significant change in the makeup of the Roman Empire. But this was only AD 212, just a year into Caracalla's reign. We still have 5 more years of this guy. Caracalla, as we'll see next time, was a troubled man. He was haunted by nightmares of his murdered brother visiting him in ghostly form. He soon became deluded, thinking that he was a reincarnation of Alexander the Great. And then, of course, there's the violence. The types of atrocities that Caracalla had instigated in Rome were soon expanded across the empire. Murder and massacres followed Caracalla wherever he went. We will talk about those final dark years of Caracalla's reign on the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Pax Romana podcast. For more information, including a list of primary sources and further reading, check the show notes. Music by Red Productions and Exocore. Follow Professor Colin Elliott on X at ProfCPE or email colin@paxromanapodcast.com. Listen to more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or just about anywhere podcasts are available. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.